Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into something huge, something that affects, well, pretty much everyone, but has been sidelined for way too long. We're talking about the women's health gap.
It's a really critical topic.
Absolutely. And, 2025 seems like a turning point. There's more attention, more funding than ever before. But that's only after decades where women were, frankly, underrepresented and underfunded in health research.
Decades, yeah.
So when we say women's health gap, what does that really mean? We're talking about, women making up over half the population using healthcare more often, but their specific health needs, historically pushed aside. And this isn't just some abstract idea. It has real consequences for clinical care, how well treatments work, and health outcomes for you, for everyone you know.
It really does. The ripple effects are enormous.
So our mission today is to unpack all of that. Where did this exclusion start? What's happening right now because of it? What are the big efforts trying to fix it? And, what's the future look like?
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this historical context that created the women's health gap in the first place.
What's fascinating here is just how deeply ingrained these biases were, shaping our medical understanding for generations. For a long, long time, the whole medical research system was basically built around men.
Specifically Caucasian men, right, as the sort of default human.
Exactly. They were seen as the normal study population. Everyone else was, well, a deviation from that norm.
So it wasn't just like an accident. It feels almost intentional, focusing research so narrowly. Seems odd for something meant to be universal, like healthcare.
That's a really important point. It wasn't purely accidental. There were a few things going on. Societal norms, for one.
Yeah.
Men were often seen as the dominant gender, so naturally research kind of followed that focus.
Okay, that makes sense in a historical context, unfortunately.
But there were also these supposedly practical reasons. Like researchers worried that women's hormones, menstrual cycles, would just complicate the studies, make the data messy.
Complicate things, or just make them different.
Well, that's the perspective now, isn't it? Back then, it was seen as a complication. And then you had tragedies like the thalidomide crisis in the 50s and 60s.
Right, the birth defects, awful.
Truly awful. And the reaction, meant to protect women, especially those who could get pregnant, ironically led to them being excluded even more from essential research.
So protection led to exclusion. Wow. And this culminated in specific policies.
It did. A really pivotal moment, though, deeply problematic, was in 1977. The FDA issued guidelines that explicitly excluded women of childbearing potential from early-stage clinical trials phase 1 and early phase 2.
Explicitly excluded, unless
Unless it was for a life-threatening condition. Otherwise, they were out.
That sounds like a massive exclusion. How did researchers actually apply that? Was it interpreted strictly?
Oh, it was interpreted very broadly. It basically shut the door on almost all premenopausal women. Even if they were using birth control or had a sterile partner or weren't sexually active, it didn't matter.
Seriously? So for nearly 2 decades?
Exactly. That policy stuck around until 1993. Almost 20 years.
20 years. Meaning medications many of us might be using today could have been developed without women really being in those early critical trials.
That's precisely it. Connect this to the bigger picture, and you see how one policy just became woven into the fabric of how drugs were developed. It created these huge gaps in knowledge we're, frankly, still trying to fill today. It's like a hidden risk baked into the system.
2 decades. Women just largely absent from that foundational data. That is staggering, but things started to change in the 90s, right? What finally pushed back?
Yes, thankfully. It took a lot of hard work from advocacy groups. The Society for Women's Health Research, founded in 1990, was really key.
Okay, so advocacy played a big role.
A huge role. Plus, government investigations started highlighting that even the weaker inclusion guidelines that existed before weren't really being followed. The pressure just kept building.
Right, so advocacy plus government scrutiny, that led to the 1993 NIH Revitalization Act. That sounds like it should have been a major turning point.
And it was, at least on paper. The act mandated women's inclusion in clinical trials funded by the federal government. The FDA followed up with similar guidance that year. It felt like a definite shift away from all that exclusion.
Okay, so the mandate was there, problem solved. Or probably not that simple.
Yeah, not quite. Here's the crucial but. The enforcement was weak. Analyzing the data separately for men and women, what we call sex disaggregated analysis, was recommended, sure.
Recommended but not required.
Exactly, not required. And that detail, that lack of a hard requirement, is a huge reason why we're still talking about these disparities 30 years later. You can invite women to this study, but if you don't actually analyze their results specifically, what's the point?
That's a really sharp insight. The data might be there, but without that specific analysis mandate. So what does that mean today, numbers-wise? 3 decades on, are the figures still looking, well, pretty bad?
They are still quite stark, yes. This raises that important question. What happens when a huge chunk of the population is effectively missing or at least underanalyzed in the data? Well, today, women make up only about 41% of participants in clinical trials overall. That's still short of representing their share of the population.
And it's worse in the early stages.
Much worse. In phase I trials, the very first studies in humans, women are only about 22% of participants.
Wow. So right at the start, when you're figuring out basic safety and dosage, women are largely missing. That has to have downstream effects.
Absolutely. Think about cardiovascular disease. It's the #1 killer of women.
Number 1 killer, yeah.
Yet, in CVD trials between 2010 and 2017, women were only 38.2% of the participants. It just doesn't add up.
It really doesn't. And the funding follows this pattern, too.
Oh, definitely. The funding landscape shows massive inequities. Conditions that are female-specific, think PMS, menopause, maternal hemorrhage, cervical cancer, endometriosis, they account for about 14% of the total women's health gap burden.
Okay, 14%.
But they receive less than 1% of research funding between 2019 and 2023. Less than 1%.
That is astonishing. It feels like some conditions just aren't valued if they mainly affect women. What about something like menopause? You mentioned billions affected globally soon.
Right, an estimated 1 billion women affected by 2025.
Yeah.
And menopause research, it gets a minuscule 0.55% of total research funding.
0.5%.
Right.
For 1 billion people.
It's baffling. And on top of all this, you have geographic and demographic issues. Women of color face even more exclusion. It's an intersectional problem where gender bias gets compounded by racial bias. It's really a systemic failure.
1 billion women. And such a tiny slice of the research pie. It really drives home how deep this blind spot runs. Okay, let's talk about some specific research gaps. What are the real-world impacts beyond the number?
Cardiovascular disease is a prime example. Women don't just get heart disease differently. They often have different symptoms. The disease progresses differently. They respond to treatments differently than men.
It's different symptoms.
Yeah.
That's key for diagnosis, right?
Absolutely. Women are more likely to have things like menosia, that's a heart attack, without the typical blocked arteries, or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, sometimes called broken heart syndrome. These often get missed or diagnosed late because they don't fit the classic male heart attack profile that dominated textbooks for so long.
Misdiagnosis, delayed treatment, deadly consequences. Okay, beyond heart health, where else are these gaps glaring? Autoimmune diseases, maybe? They affect women much more, don't they?
Strikingly more.
Yeah.
About 80% of people with autoimmune diseases are women. 80%.
Wow.
Yet, the research funding doesn't reflect that at all. Take rheumatoid arthritis. It hits women's healthy life years 6 times harder than men's. But funding focused specifically on women's health aspects. Only 7% of the total NIH funding over 5 recent fiscal years.
7% for a condition where women bear so much more burden. Is anything changing there?
There is a positive step. The NIH recently set up an Office of Autoimmune Disease Research. It's got $10 million in initial funding. It's a start, maybe, but still small relative to the scale of the problem.
A start or something, I suppose. And mental health. We know rates of depression and anxiety are higher in women. How does the research gap play out there?
It's another critical area. Women have significantly higher rates of depression, more than double. Actually, plus more anxiety, more PTSD. And then there's peripartum depression, affecting up to 1 in 7 women in the U.S. after childbirth.
So common, yet.
Yet, so much of the basic preclinical research on treatments, done mostly in male lab animals or male subjects. So we have these huge knowledge gaps about how safe and effective treatments really are for women. We're often trying to treat half the population using data primarily from the other half.
It's like working with an incomplete map. And reproductive health, menopause. You said earlier it's fragmented.
Totally fragmented and chronically underfunded. Menopause research is especially neglected. Many funding agencies don't even have a specific category for it.
No category for something that affects half the population.
It sounds unbelievable, but it limits our understanding of basic hormonal health, how the menstrual cycle affects how drugs work, the long-term health impacts of things like pregnancy or menopause. It's a massive blind spot across a woman's entire life.
So these gaps aren't just about specific diseases. They actually affect how drugs are developed and prescribed for everything, right? The pills we take every day.
Precisely. We know there are sex differences in how drugs are metabolized, how available they are in the body, how likely they are to cause side effects. It's well documented scientifically.
But it doesn't make it into practice.
Rarely. Here's a really stark example. Zolpidem, the sleep aid Ambien. It is the only medication out there that has different official dosing recommendations for men and women right on the label.
The only one, despite all the evidence of other
The
differences.
only one, despite widespread evidence suggesting sex differences matter for hundreds of other drugs.
That's wild. So what's the actual impact for women taking standard doses that weren't optimized for them?
The impact is alarming. Women are nearly twice as likely as men to experience adverse drug reaction side effects. So when you go to your doctor, the treatment plan they're using might be based on research that mostly involved men. It's like trying to navigate your city with a map of a different city. It might get you close, but it's not optimized, and you might run into problems.
An incomplete map.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really captures it. Okay, after hearing all that history, all those persistent gaps, it does sound like there's finally a real push happening now. Investment, activity, that's got to feel positive.
It absolutely does. There's significant momentum, which is fantastic. But, while these new initiatives are vital, we have to be careful. New tech, for example, could just end up repeating the old biases if the data we feed it isn't diverse enough.
Right, garbage in, garbage out, even with fancy AI.
Exactly. But there are focused efforts. The Society for Women's Health Research has highlighted 3 priorities for COM25. Uterine health, focusing on fibroids, autoimmune diseases, especially lupus, and cardiometabolic health in women, that's heart disease, diabetes, stroke risk factors.
Chosen because of the potential impact.
Yes, because of their significant impact and where research could really make a difference relatively quickly.
And what about bigger policy moves on a national or even global scale?
We're seeing some major things. In the U.S., there's a new vision for women's health research from the national academies that's guidance for the NIH on priorities, training, funding. And ARPAH, the Advanced Research Agency, has committed $100 million specifically to women's health. That's a big deal.
100 million is definitely significant. What about elsewhere?
The European Union is also making big moves. They've put over $2 billion into more than 1,000 women's health projects. And crucially, looking at gender differences is now mandatory for all their big Horizon Europe research projects. Companies even need gender equality plans.
Mandatory analysis, finally. That sounds like real teeth.
It does. And globally, the World Economic Forum launched a Global Alliance for Women's Health just this year, 2024. They've already secured $55 million and are setting up a platform to track the impact of these investments. So, yeah, it's a level of coordination we just haven't seen before.
Okay, that's a lot of policy momentum. What about technology? Is it helping bridge these gaps too?
It definitely has the potential.
Yeah.
Things like precision medicine and AI could be game changers for spotting sex-specific patterns and tailoring treatments. But again, that caution, AI is only as good as its training data. If the data lacks women, especially diverse women, the AI could actually worsen disparities.
So the data quality is paramount. We need to fix the input to get good output. Any other promising tech?
Yeah, microbiome research is another exciting area, especially the vaginal microbiome. There are new diagnostics coming out that use genomic sequencing and AI together to get better results for conditions like bacterial vaginosis, which is incredibly common and often poorly treated.
That sounds very targeted.
And then you have the whole FemTech sector. It's growing fast, using tech specifically for women's health needs.
FemTech sounds like it could directly tackle some of these neglected areas. Where's the focus there?
It is promising, but there's a bit of an imbalance right now, an important insight, really. Fertility solutions get the lion's share of the investment.
Ah, so areas like menopause or sexual health.
Still pretty underdeveloped in the FemTech space, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And there's a big venture capital problem. Companies founded only by women get just 2% of all VC funding. And for Black and Latina women founders, it's a tiny 0.1%.
0.1%.
Yeah. And this is despite the fact that about 3/4 of women's health companies are actually led by women founders, people bringing that crucial lived experience. The money isn't always flowing to the people who understand the problems most deeply.
So even with progress, there are still these systemic institutional hurdles.
Definitely. There's still resistance in some research circles to really emphasizing sex differences. Part of it is maybe nervousness about evolving ideas around gender identity.
That's complex.
It is. And then there's just this lingering perception, unfortunately, that women's health is somehow a niche topic, not mainstream health. And that perception limits funding, limits attention. It requires a fundamental mindset shift.
Treating half the population as a niche. And what about those regulatory ethical challenges, especially around pregnancy?
Yeah, that's still incredibly tricky. Including pregnant and lactating women in trials involves complex ethics. You have to balance the mother's right to participate and benefit with protecting the fetus or infant. Historically, the solution was just exclusion.
Which created huge knowledge gaps.
Exactly. We still lack so much data on medication safety during pregnancy and breastfeeding because of it. Figuring out how to ethically include these women in research safely is a major ongoing challenge. We need that knowledge.
Okay, so we've talked about the health costs, the research gaps, but there's a massive economic side to this too, isn't there? These aren't just health stats. They look like huge economic opportunities if we tackle this gap.
Absolutely. This raises the crucial question. Can we really afford not to prioritize women's health, given the economics? The impact is huge. McKinsey research suggests women spend about 25% more of their lives in poor health compared to men.
25% more of their lives, that must impact productivity, healthcare costs.
Massively. It leads to lower productivity, higher healthcare spending globally. This isn't just a women's issue, it's a drag on the entire global economy.
So flipping that around, closing the gap isn't just the right thing to do, it's actually smart economics, a good investment.
A fantastic investment, potentially. Look at this insight. Just closing the gaps in cardiovascular care for women in the U.S. That alone could boost the U.S. economy by $28 billion a year by 2040.
$28 billion just from heart health.
Just from that one area. Globally, tackling women's health disparities across the board could unlock over $1 trillion in annual global GDP by 2040.
$1 trillion annually.
Yeah. And think personally. Better women's health could mean about 7 extra healthy days per woman per year. Think what that means for individual lives, for families, for the workforce. The ROI is just undeniable.
The numbers are staggering. Okay, with all that in mind, the history, the gaps, the potential, what are the key things that need to happen now? It feels like it needs systemic change, not just tinkering.
It absolutely requires systemic change. Key steps. We need much better data collection. That means standardizing how we collect and analyze data based on sex across all research. It means mandatory reporting of participant demographics and sex-specific results in clinical trials. No more recommended.
Make it mandatory. Got it. What else?
Training and education. We need comprehensive training for everyone involved, researchers, doctors, regulators, on why sex and gender matter in health, how to design studies properly, how to analyze the data. We need to overcome those historical blind spots through education.
Building that awareness and skill, and on a bigger scale.
More collaboration internationally. These are global problems, so sharing best practices, pooling resources, coordinating research makes sense. And policy reform is crucial.
Stronger enforcement of those inclusion mandates.
Definitely. Plus, creating specific funding streams dedicated to women's health research. And critically, figuring out those regulatory pathways to safely include pregnant and lactating women in studies when appropriate. We need that data.
It's a multi-pronged approach then. Data, training, collaboration, policy. So wrapping this up, what's the core takeaway for us, for the listener thinking about the future?
The core message, I think, is that treating women's health as a mainstream priority, not a niche interest, isn't just ethically right. It's simply smart. It's an investment in people, in the economy, in a healthier future for everyone. And right now, with all these initiatives converging, policy, tech, economic awareness, there's a real chance, maybe an unprecedented one, to fundamentally change the landscape.
It really feels like a moment of opportunity. So this deep dive, it's shown that while 2025 is seeing this surge in attention and funding for women's health, those deep-rooted barriers are still there. But the good news, there's real momentum from policy, from tech, from understanding the economics. It feels like a unique chance for real change.
It does.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Given how much our understanding of health was shaped by such a narrow, male-focused view for so long, what other gaps might we still be overlooking, not just in health, but in other areas? And how can you maybe push for a broader, more inclusive way of looking at things, of building knowledge?
That's a great question to ponder.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this gave you a clearer picture of the women's health gap, the challenges, but also the really exciting potential ahead.